All right. The election in Lynn Haven is like 3 weeks away. And voters have an opportunity to really make a difference because 4 out of the 5 seats are up for grabs, including the mayor's seat. And as you know, Lynn Haven has been in turmoil for a long time, really, but especially since the constitutionally elected mayor was removed by the Bay County Sheriff's Office and the FBI and charged with 64 counts and 1,000 years in prison, which were later dropped, of course. And the saga goes on, but for some reason she had to be removed. And now Jesse Nelson has been the mayor in a special election over the past 2 years. Prior to the arrest, indictment, removal of the real mayor, Mayor Anderson, of course, you know that there was theft, there was corruption, and the people responsible for it were caught. Mayor Anderson and James Finch blew the whistle, especially Anderson. And well, I don't want to rehash the whole story, but it's been a disaster in Lynn Haven. And this is the first time that the voters have a chance to really do something about it. I've been critical of Jesse Nelson, as you know. I've had very painful interview with him one time. And he claims to have a doctorate in leadership, He has a doctor in, in ministry. He has an earned doctor in ministry. It's very important because he claims that a lot of people say it's not earned. He has an earned doctor of ministry. I don't know why he says he has a doctor of leadership, but he does. So because it is time now for voters to consider the candidates, I want to go over a little bit of his qualifications. And one way I want to do that, because I'm qualified to do it, is to take a look at a academic paper he wrote that was sent to me a while back. He wrote it in 2020. I'm going to show it to you in its entirety. It's only 6 pages. I'm going to show it to you. I do not believe that this is any kind of sort of a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, because he doesn't have a PhD. It's a different kind of doctorate. All right. So I don't think it's that. It can't possibly be. Let's put it that way. But it is sort of an academic article that was published, and I want to go over some of it with you. I want you to take a look at it and come to your own conclusion if you believe that Jesse Nelson is a thinker, right? If he in this it's an argumentative composition. And that doesn't mean that he's arguing. It means in an academic sense versus, say, a descriptive composition or a narrative composition or even an expository composition, okay, which might be like a scientific essay. This is basically an argument, making the case, all right? So why am I qualified to look at, to grade it? Well, I taught argumentative composition in college. Okay. I have a master's degree in English. I have a master's degree in journalism. I taught argumentative composition, persuasive writing in 3 different colleges, including Gulf Coast. Sometimes my former students are here. So if you're here, hello. It's been since 2007. Before that, I taught it at Penn State and I taught it at Weber State University. Okay. So this is something that I care deeply about. So when I see something that I would probably turn back to a freshman and say, yeah, it's a do-over. You've got to do it over. And here's what we need to work on. It's not up to snuff to what Mayor Jesse Nelson pretends it to be. Okay, that's my opinion. I'll show it to you in a moment. But again, Lynn Haven voters, you have a chance to really make a difference. Early voting starts April 10th, I believe, and the election is April 18th. And there's a couple folks I really hope get elected, And as a matter of fact, they bought campaign ads for this show, and I want to share them with you. Judy Tinder is running for mayor of Lynn Haven. She wants commissioners to spend taxpayer money more responsibly, as if it came out of their own pockets. As mayor, she'll insist that your money is spent on the most important things first, like prioritizing the flooding problems in ways that really work. Vote for Judy Tinder on or before April 18th. Brian Gray is running for Lynn Haven City Commission Seat 1. He wants to reform code enforcement so that everyone is treated equally for once. He rejects adopting the International Property Maintenance Code. Don't turn the city into a giant HOA. Vote for Gray on or before April 18th. All right, so this is what I want to take a look at. Oh, gosh. I can't believe I did this. We're going to do it this way, though. Maybe I'll even scoot to the side and talk about it. That's what I'll do. I uploaded the ones without the background. But anyway, we'll do it this way. Heck, I'll just go like this. I'll talk to you from here. How about that? I can even point at it. Look. Jeez. All right. So the paper that I'm going to talk about comes from September 2020. And it is titled No Longer Silent, A Practical Theology for Preaching on Racism by Jesse Nelson. And we're going to go over it. But what I want to preface this with is I do not want this. And if you make it this way, I'm telling you, I will hide the comments just like the city of Lynn Haven does. I will hide comments, and I may even ban you if you say some dumb stuff. All right, some bad stuff, because it's about a sensitive topic. It's about racism, and I actually take it very seriously. I also take being a pastor very seriously, and this conversation is not going to be about George Floyd. It's not going to be even really about racism. I do not want to debate about racism. What I do want to do is take a look at this paper and ask ourselves, is it well argued? Does it have good sources? Is it well researched? Does the writer take the research and synthesize it into a new idea, a new way of looking at racism? Which when you get past your bachelor's degree, right? If you are trying to get your master's degree, I have two, I've done this twice, or you're trying to get your PhD, when you write papers, I wasn't allowed to write a paper and make an argument, for example, on Shakespeare. I wanted to write about Hamlet, but at Penn State, when I was getting my master's degree in literature, the professor said, everything's already been argued about Hamlet. Pick another subject. So I had to pick another subject. I ended up writing on Cymbeline. Because you can't just write a basic paper. You have to present a new idea, a new way of thinking based on all of this, on this topic. And what I want to show you is that Mayor Nelson doesn't do that. All right. But I do want to mention something on the issue of racism, actually, and about how serious I take equality and the dignity of every human being. I'm particularly sensitive about the issue, to be honest with you. And one reason I'm going to show you. I was sued by Hector Solis, the former city councilman, in which this idiot called me a racist because he's a Mexican American. And so, when I deposed him, I found out that he had been in a feud with a Black American back in Texas. And I also found out that people wrote go home N-words on this Black family's home. And when I asked Councilman Solis if he knew about it and if he did it, under oath in a deposition with his lawyer there, he would not answer the question. He would not deny it. And in court, if you don't deny it, it is admitted. So we had here, and the news outlets knew about it, and everybody knew about it, that there was a councilman who did not deny that under oath. Therefore, it's admitted in court, and not a single newspaper wrote about it. Nobody showed up with me to protest this. So I'm very sensitive when I hear people who claim to stand up against racism won't even show up at a damn meeting and confront this kind of stuff. All right, we got it. So I'm going to be very short-fused at the first one of you knuckleheads who accuse me of racism for going over this paper about how it is an inadequate academic paper. Capiche? All right, but I'm going to show you anyway about how this was just a short example. I didn't have a lawyer, so I was Bernie the attorney. This was Hector Solis. He keeps looking at his attorney because he doesn't know what to do. His attorney ended up leaving after 3 weeks after this deposition. So I've never done a deposition. This is before I was good at being Bernie the attorney. All right, he's under oath. I just want you to listen to this for a moment. And this is my attempt to show you how serious I am about the topic. Watch this.
When did you meet Ernest Walker? Once again, I said it was between probably 2010, 2012. Now, do you know if anybody ever wrote on Ernest Walker's home, "Go home" in words? Yes, I do know about that. Tell me about that. What happened? He's a Black American. He is. He's an African American. And did he just move into the neighborhood, or had he lived there for a while? This is in Texas. Right. It was a location that he was utilizing, and I was trying to get his business, help him with his business, get it off the ground. What kind of business did he have? He was renting out a specific location as a wedding venue. Okay. And he endured this racism?
I'm going to object, Mr. Thompson. I don't know
lawyer.
what these questions are, why you're asking about Ernest Walker and his time in Texas.
Well,
has nothing to do with the complaint.
Well, it's mentioned in the small claims court.
Yes, he mentioned that he would go to small claims court. What does that, besides the lawsuit in small claim, what does your question have to do with this lawsuit?
Are you objecting to the relevance or to the form?
I'm objecting to both of it. I mean, you can show the point you're trying to get to. I mean, these are just random questions. It seem to be random questions that don't have any relevance to this case.
So I understand. Are you instructing me not to answer these questions?
You can rephrase the question.
Okay. My question is, do you know who these individuals were that wrote that on his home? No. But you're familiar with the incident? Yes, it was very unfortunate. Were you involved in the incident?
Object to the form. Object, don't answer that question. There's no relevance. And to the extent that it can lead.
Is that amazing that you can't just say, hell no, I didn't write "go home" N words on a Black family's home? Is that incredible?
To Fifth Amendment protection.
And are you claiming Fifth Amendment on this?
No, I'm claiming this is irrelevant.
Okay. If this were to go toward political retaliation and a trend, would that hold? And remember, please, I am a pro se defendant. You certainly know the legal path, and I know you can't advise me. But if there's political retribution, if there's a trend of that, a reprisal with Councilman Hector Solis, and maybe this lawsuit is part of that to shut me up, and maybe if he has a history of doing things like this to people he doesn't agree with, wouldn't that be relevant?
Okay, you can ask the questions. Again, I'm not going to answer questions. I'm not being opposed.
I understand.
You're right. I can't give you legal advice. I can tell you what I believe is relevant, what I'm going to instruct my client to answer, not to answer.
Okay.
And if we don't disagree, then we have to go in front of the judge, and the judge make that determination.
Well, my question is, were you involved in that incident at all?
Again, I'm instructing.
Okay,
not to
I'll
answer.
move along.
All right, couldn't answer it, couldn't deny it, and in a court of law, that means it's admissible. So my point there is I don't want this conversation to be about race. And if it is, I'm telling you, I will hide your comments. And if you make what I consider to be a repugnant comment, I'm just going to ban you. All right. So let's get to the actual paper. And I want us to consider, does Jesse Nelson, Doctor of Ministry, does Jesse Nelson, the mayor and candidate for reelection, write an essay that looks to you to be an academic essay supported by research and sources and analyzed to bring a new way of looking at an issue? Tell me if he does this. All right, here's page 1, and I'm actually going to hide behind it here. All right, so it's called No Longer Silent, a Practical Theology for Preaching on Racism. That's what it's about. So let's see if he states the purpose of his paper and what he hopes to accomplish in the paper. And he sort of does here. So he talks on this page about the incident with George Floyd. George Floyd died with the police officer. You know the story. Let's go to paragraph 2. As an African American affiliated with several evangelical groups, I am greatly disappointed in the silence of the evangelical voice regarding the murders of Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the systemic racism that continues to oppress many African Americans. I'm disheartened because the evangelical voice is loud and clear in speaking up for the rights of an unknown child, but seem to be unheard when African men and women, African American men and women, are fighting for the right to live. Many evangelicals complain about the protesting, rioting, looting throughout the nation, but they say nothing about the shootings in those same communities. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And there is a footnote there. The statement brings a question to mind. That is, are you guilty of being silent? The sins of racism that injustice perpetuate in our congregations, classrooms, communities, and circles of influence, because some of us are silent and refuse to preach against those evils. Some evangelical pastors and preachers have told me they want to speak up but do not know what to say or preach. See, I would like to know at this point, if I'm grading the paper, I want to know, tell us who these preachers are, who the pastors are. Tell it, who says that exactly? Where were they? And what were their concerns exactly? He says, in this essay, okay, here's his purpose. I provide a practical theology of preaching on racism by, here's how, answering the why and how we should preach on racism. I also share a sermon series I preached on racism to demonstrate theology in practice. I hope this essay will provide inspiration and ideas for preaching on racism so that we are no longer silent about this sin. The Bible speaks against racism, and we should too. All right, preaching on racism, a practical theology. What did you or your pastor say on the Sunday, May 31st? This Sunday was the first Sunday after George Floyd's death. Was it a sermon on racism? Why or why not? Why do we at evangelicals not preach on racism? Some evangelical preachers have told me they do not preach on racism because they are uncertain of what to say or preach. I want to know who and where. Are these local people? Are these people in the North? Are they in Massachusetts? Are they in Seattle? Are they in Mississippi? Are they in Panama City? Are they white preachers? Are they black preachers? What's their congregation look like? These are important things. Others, here we go again. Others have told me they do not want to be misunderstood and say the wrong thing. There's a quote there. Who said that? See, others did not say that exact same thing. That's a quote. I believe others are fearful of being terminated from their position in their congregations or school admission. Okay, but this is an academic paper. So why do you believe that? What data do you have to support that? What research have you done? When has it happened? Who have you talked to? How recently? You know, we need this sort of information in a paper like this, in an essay. Why should we preach on racism? By the way, this is only 6 pages, so it's not like mine, which was like 20 or 25 pages. By the way, I'll post mine. I'll tell you about that in a minute too. My master's thesis, which is, way more extensive than this. He goes on to say, let's see. Why we should preach on racism because our congregations need to hear God's perspective on the divisive issue. We should preach on racism to interject the Christian voice into the global conversation, which is often facilitated by individuals, groups, or organizations without a Christian conscience. All right, there's another assertion. When I would teach argumentative composition in college, here's what I would tell the students. When you make an assertion, it's got to be supported. All right? Imagine your assertion is a tabletop. It's got to have legs. Those are the reasons, right? It can be an appeal to authority. It can be an appeal to emotion even. It can be an appeal to logic. But you've got to have reasons to support your assertion. You can't just make an assertion and move along like you're sitting eating breakfast with somebody. And I would always say, if you make an assertion, you should have at least how many reasons, would you say? How much evidence? Well, I would say if you have a table and you have one leg, your table's not stable, right? It's going to fall over. What if you have 2 legs? Your table's not stable. It's going to fall over. What if you have a table with 3 legs? Now we're talking. Now your table's more stable. Your assertion is on solid ground, right? So when you make an assertion in an academic paper, you've got to provide reasons and evidence. You don't just get to say it like you're eating breakfast with a friend. All right. All right. So he says, which is often facilitated by individuals, groups, and organizations. Who, without a Christian conscience. Okay. Tell us more. Preaching on racism will demonstrate unity within the kingdom of God because we can all share in condemning this sin. Preaching on racism will encourage our congregations and student bodies by knowing their leadership is sympathetic towards racism, discrimination, and injustice experienced by African Americans and other people of color. How do we preach on racism? Okay, these are these transitions between paragraphs. It's good to do that, but these are not very advanced transitions. Let me just put it that way. When preaching on racism, one must acknowledge the fact. Why? In an academic paper, you don't just get to say what one must do. This is an argumentative composition paper. It's got to have evidence and reasons and context. One must acknowledge that the fact that racism exists today. Racism is the belief. Now, here we go. Now, I want you to understand this. It's good to define the terms. We got to do that, right? But it would also be nice to have context and how racism, the definition of racism, how it's been understood over the years too. That would be nice to see. But he defines it here. Racism is the belief that one race is superior over another race. These beliefs may be conscious or unconscious. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. I got to hear more about that. However, the beliefs are manifested through power, influence, position, and communication by rejecting, marginalizing, or oppressing people of another race. And there he cites somebody. The only source that he cites is a pastor that he admires by the name of Tony Evans. What I want to share with you at this point, the most disturbing part about this academic paper is, again, not the content of the paper, okay, but the fact that this paper doesn't advance any new ideas. It is simply regurgitating what he saw on YouTube on a 2-minute video. This entire paper is regurgitating what Pastor Tony Evans says. I'm going to show you. I want you to listen closely to the words of this 2-minute YouTube video. And then I want you to continue reading along this paper and tell me if this doesn't walk the line of plagiarism from a 2-minute YouTube video. If he handed this paper to me, I would have given it back to him and told him, you've got to support your assertions throughout this paper. And you need a lot more sources. I would have told him more too, but that's basically what I would have done. So let's do this. I'll show you who he is regurgitating here. All right.
Racism. Well, first of all, let's define racism. Racism is the conscious or unconscious belief in the superiority of one's race over and against another race. That feeling, that belief gets manifested in the use of power or influence or resources or even communication that seeks to reject or marginalize or even oppress a person of another color, race, or ethnicity. When we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about the presence of racism, as we've just defined it, being embedded into the structures of society, whether those structures are political or economic or legal or medical or related to housing or employment. It is where it has become part of the policies or procedures of a way a particular entity operates. Of course, we're all aware of the evil system of slavery. That was a legal system that oppressed a group of people because of the color of their skin. But that got embedded into other structures in society. For example, criminal justice. There was a practice called peonage or debt servitude, where after the 13th Amendment was established, granting freedom to slaves, there was a clause that said unless you're a criminal. So what was done was the criminalizing of men for the most minor of infractions so that the 13th Amendment could not be applied. And they would be held in servitude, oftentimes way beyond what they were arrested for. And many times they were arrested for little or nothing in order to keep them from being able to claim the freedom that was being granted by the 13th Amendment. It showed up in the way people were denied.
Okay, you can look up the rest of that. You can look up the rest of that, Tony Perkins, Pastor Perkins. And my biggest problem with this academic paper is that it doesn't provide a new way of understanding anything. It is simply a regurgitation of what you saw on YouTube. That's my biggest problem with this, and it's a big deal for me, right? Because I taught this stuff, right? This is what I trained in. This is what I'm passionate about. All right, I'm going to finish looking over this with you and grading it, as I say, right after this. Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777.
Is your past ruining your future? Having your record sealed or expunged wipes the slate clean, providing you with a new opportunity in life. I'm Al Saulene, your Panama City Beach lawyer. 215-0628.
All right, let's take a look at the rest of this, and you'll hear now a lot of what you just heard. All right, so it talks about these beliefs may be conscious or unconscious. However, the beliefs are manifested through power, influence, position, communication by rejecting, marginalizing, or oppressing people of another race. And he does footnote the pastor I just showed you. Racism is real and lives in the heart of many citizens throughout our nation and in our local communities and churches. Again, that's an assertion. That's where you need to flesh that out with evidence, with reasons, with data, showing attitudes over the years and so on and so forth. In a paper like this, you don't just get to do that. Racism is sinful and we must preach against the sin. Before calling out this sin, before calling out this sin in the lives of others, preachers must be introspective and rid ourselves of any hint of racism in our hearts and minds. These are basically little moral lectures that we all agree with. This is like, again, sitting at breakfast, sipping coffee, talking with a friend. This is not an academic essay. When preaching on racism, sermons must be, there's a lot of musts in here, be biblical. The points and principles should be derived from a theological, historical, cultural, and what does that say? Exegetical, I don't even know that word. Exegetical study of Scripture. When preaching on racism, sermons should be practical. Preachers have to include how to and what's next applications for their listeners. Again, give us some data on this. Give us some research on this. Quit just saying what people must do, should do, or have to do. That is not an academic essay. Sermons on racism should be culturally sensitive. Tell us why. We all feel that way. We all believe that, but help us understand it more. We must know our hearts, must, have to, should, got to, better. When it sounds like he's up there saying next, speaker allowed to come up and talk. Be quiet. You can't say, you must not. We must condemn racism as a sin and diabolical. Okay. Preaching on racism, theology and practice. After watching the death of George Floyd and hearing the outcry of Black America and my community, I felt God encouraged me to preach a series of prophetic messages on racism. Nothing wrong with that. Instead of continuing with my sermon series from Psalm 34, I began a new sermon series on May 31st, the first Sunday after George Floyd's death. My first sermon was, I'm angry. All right. And then he goes on, I gave my congregation these steps for dealing with their anger caused and by past and present acts of racism and injustice. First, we must realize we are angry. Second, we should realize our anger is in a healthy way. Third, we should reconcile our offender. Okay. Page 4 out of 6. My second sermon was Being Black is Not a Curse from Genesis 9. Some African Americans believe God cursed our race. Tell us about that. Talk about that. Who believes that? Where did that come from? When did it begin? What research has been done on it? Who has really looked at this over the years? Tell us about this. The idea of being cursed generates hopelessness because some African Americans believe suppression is their destiny. You got to tell us who. However, this message offered my congregation hope. The main point of the sermon was that being Black is not a curse because God did not curse us. I share a few theological, historical, cultural, and there's that word again, observations from Genesis 9 to eradicate the erroneous theology called the curse of Ham. First, Noah did not curse Ham. Noah cursed Canaan and the son of Ham, which means Noah did not curse all the descendants of Ham, just Canaan. And then he goes on. Here we go. Benjamin Palmer, a Presbyterian theologian and pastor in the 1800s, relied on the curse of Ham to justify American slavery. And there's a footnote. Noah cursed Canaan, not Ham. Therefore, Palmer's claim is unjustified. Second, Canaan was to serve his brothers. That is, I can't, the writing is so small and I'm not up on my biblical history. Is that Mizraim, Put, and Cush, not his uncles, Japheth and Shem? First, the land of Canaan was the Middle East, not Africa. So there is no curse on any of the African nations. Fourth, God did not curse blacks, although Noah cursed Canaan. Noah's curse was powerful because God did not sanction the curse. Powerless because God did not sanction the curse. A few members of my congregation who are in their late 60s and early 70s told me they thought blacks were cursed because that is what they were told in the past. But this message broke the psychological curse because they lived under their entire life. I find that extremely hard to believe. And I definitely want to hear more about that if I'm grading this paper. I want to hear more about that if I'm grading this paper. I'm not just going to buy that members of Mayor Nelson's congregation as a pastor in Panama City, who are in their 60s and 70s, believe that blacks are cursed biblically, and that his sermon broke that curse, the psychological curse that they live. I'm not buying it. Might be a great pastor, very motivating, but I'm not buying that that black men and women in Panama City in their 60s and 70s believe God cursed them, and that his sermon broke them free from that psychological curse. Not buying it. Sorry. Okay. I got to hear more about that. My next message was a two-part message entitled How Jesus Fixed Racism. The sermon for part one was based on an exposition. The main point of this from Ephesians 2:11-22. At least there's a citation there. The main point of the sermon was that Jesus fixed the problem of racism by uniting us as one family under God. So Jesus fixed the problem of racism by uniting us as one family under God. I noted three truths from these verses. First, Jesus united us with his blood. Second, Jesus united us by removing the wall of division. Third, Jesus united us by making us fellow heirs of God's kingdom. I agree with that we are all God's children, equal, and every single person on earth born in God's image, with dignity and with freedom that is stolen usually by thugs or government. But then I repeat myself. The sermon for part two was based on John 4:4-42. From the verses, I identified 5 principles of racial reconciliation. All right. Here are Jesse's 5 verses, Mayor Nelson's of racial reconciliation. Again, the purpose of me grading this paper is to evaluate the mayor as a thinker. It is not to examine his arguments on race. It is to examine if his assertions in this paper are argued well and supported as they should be in a college essay, especially a postgraduate essay. All right, number one, he says, we must, again, a lot of musts. Okay, we must, all of them are we must. These are like Mayor Nelson's 5 commandments for, what was it he said it was for exactly? 5 principles for reconciliation. Okay, here we go. We must cross the lines of racial divide. But here's my issue. He says here that Jesus fixed all this. All right. I mean, that paragraph, that second to last paragraph, it seems to me is sort of undermining what the rest of his stuff is saying here. But because if Jesus, it said, fixes the problem of racism by uniting us. Okay. All right, let's look at his 5 principles for racial reconciliation. 1, we must cross the lines of racial divide. Racism will continue to exist if we segregate our society by restricting certain groups of people from certain places. Where does that happen? 2, we must start conversations to address the issue. Our conversations should begin with simple introductory matters, then move towards the tough issue of racism. 3, we must call out sin. Racism is a sin that must be called out. We say, love your neighbor as yourself, but do we ever say it's a sin if we do not love your neighbor as yourself? 4, we must find common ground. We are divided politically, racially, religiously, but the cross of Christ is the common ground for every Christian. 5, we must come to Jesus. We must preach the gospel of truth and liberation. We must lift up Jesus to overcome racism because he will draw all men unto him from every race and culture. All right. So the final message in my racism series was from Luke 10:25-37, entitled, Who is My Neighbor? I made the following applications. First, our neighbors do not always look like us. Second, our neighbors are not limited to those who live beside us. That's a good point. Third, our neighbors are those who show us compassion. Okay. Here's his conclusion. So all of that research that came from a YouTube guy, a channel, Tony Perkins, and Perkins is more than a research guy. Okay. He's a pastor. He's educated. He's broadcast for many years. All right. He's obviously a guy who cares, is learned, and has accomplished a lot. So I didn't mean it like that. Here's his conclusion. Have you preached on racism? Do you plan to preach on racism? Will you be no longer silent? Racism and see, I want to know about that too. Show me that preachers and pastors have been silent on racism. Show me that. Are they more silent today than they were 20 years ago? Than they were 50 years ago? Show me the data and the research. Goodness grief. As oracles of God, we must denounce the fruits of racism, hate, and discrimination harvested in our communities and fed to future generations through some of our homes, churches, and schools. Racism is a sin that can only be eradicated only by preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Woe to us if we do not preach the gospel of truth and liberation. Some of us, and this looks like a quote, some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found in the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must. Gosh, where's the beginning of this? I wish that he would tell me who he's quoting here. This bottom part here. Okay, we must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak and we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesizing of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace this movement and pray that our inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. And then, okay, so he cites a footnote. That's Martin Luther King in a speech beyond Vietnam in 1967. Now, I'm telling you, as somebody who taught persuasive writing, argumentative composition, if this is a postgraduate research paper essay, this quote that takes up half a page has to be cited. We have to know, put it in context. All right. And you'll see that he has 6 sources. All right. It would be nice to see more than 10. 2 of them are the same guy I showed you, Tony Evans, 1 and 4. 2 of them are Martin Luther King Jr. And 1 of them is Stephen Hayes. And then 1 of them is Genesis. Well, actually, it's biblical quotes. All right. All right, that's it. So here's what I'm asking you. Again, I'm not talking about the topic. Okay, I'm talking about, it could have been any topic. This is an academic paper. And look, if this is not his doctoral dissertation, he didn't get that kind of doctorate. This is not a master's thesis. Okay, it's not. This is more of an academic article, but it's very lacking. And the main reason it's lacking is it doesn't provide anything other than regurgitating what two people have said, two very important and good people. But they're not you, Jesse. They're not you, Mayor. When you write a paper like this, you take all of the research on the topic, you synthesize it, you come up with new ideas. I'll give you an example. Hell, I'll give you my example. My second master's thesis was about, I got a master's in English on this one, and it was about cliches. We were teaching, while we were getting our master's degree, we were teaching freshman writers, freshman English. And my colleagues were talking about how upset they were that too many of the students were using cliches. And if they used cliches, they would just make them rewrite the whole thing because cliches are terrible. And it got me thinking. Are they always terrible? Because I had just read a couple of books, and they both use cliches, but one of the books used cliches deftly. The other one was not so good. The cliches didn't bring anything new. They rattled and clanged, right? They were stale and trite. So I wrote a paper arguing that cliches are okay sometimes. And it was titled, I believe it was something like an argument for here's what it was titled: The Well-Placed Cliche, The Hermeneutics of Everydayness. That was the title of my master's thesis. Are you ready for that? The well-placed cliche and the hermeneutics of everydayness. Hermeneutics means a way of understanding, right? Sometimes a cliche is a real time saver, right? If you say that somebody wears their religion on their sleeve, I know immediately what you mean, right? Sometimes they can be a time saver. So if they're well placed, they can actually be creative and useful. So I made a counterintuitive argument that had not been made, that cliches are not always bad. So context matters, even when it comes to that. So it was an argument that had not been made. And I took a bunch of examples, a bunch of research from a bunch of researchers, and I synthesized all that information into my own idea. And I argued that. That is what I'm talking about. I did not take one or two people who I respected and admired and regurgitated, sometimes without even giving them credit, with a bunch of we musts. So I would have taken Jesse Nelson's paper in 2020 and gave it back to him and said, look, all those times that you make an assertion, you got to support it with evidence. Let's start there. And then we'll keep improving and fleshing out the paper until you start to get your own idea that you bring forward. All right. I just had to do this. A lot of you talk about this. Again, I do not think this is any kind of I don't think it couldn't have been his thesis. I don't think. If a freshman gave me that, I'd make him rewrite it. Okay. So my problems with Mayor Jesse Nelson. I believe he's I think he's largely a fraud, to be honest with you. And I say that because he claims still to have a doctorate of leadership, and he can't even answer a question. And he is led by the caller, by the establishment, and the intermediary is the scumbag and political operative Arthur Cullen. Now, if that's your good friend, it says a lot about you. And you're up for re-election. And I think people need to know some of these things. And so my criticism of this paper is that it was not academic. And I've told you why it left a lot to be desired. All right, I'm going to look through your comments. Again, please do not make this a racial, an argument about George Floyd or woke culture or, all this kind of stuff. Because if there's, well, let me just leave it at that. All right, it's not about that. Let me also, before I go, I am going to go read your comments. I would like to see what you have to say. And if you would like to see my master's thesis, I'll post it for you. Right? What did I say it was titled? Why do I forget? The well-placed cliche, the hermeneutics of everydayness. If somebody tells you never use cliches, tell them sometimes they're okay. Read this. All right. I also want to thank the rest of those sponsors who allow me to do this.
You want to look good? You want to feel good? Little John's Big and Tall is where it's at. Right across the street from Sky's Pizza Pie, 5700 North Davis Highway. You can find out more online at littlejohnsbigandtall.com. He's also a member of the iTex trading community, where your iTex dollars are welcome.
It's a hot time in Florida, and my friend Ryan could make sure your air conditioning is running at peak efficiency. He could even install a new one, built to a higher standard, American standard. Find out more at pcairrepair.com. And of course, thank you to the Unknown Patriot for your support. Always so much appreciated, so that I can try and give you the rest of the story that you're not going to get on the TV news, and that you're certainly not going to get on the radio or the newspaper, but you will, of course, get it at the Beacon of Bay County. They're always up on it, usually before even I'm up on it. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you soon.